King David, Scene 1. David the Fugitive. As David's popularity with the people of Israel grew, so did King Saul's hatred of him. Saul urged his son Jonathan to kill David, but Jonathan had promised to always look out for his closest friend, David. Jonathan said to his father, "What has David done to harm you? He's always served you well and risked his life for our people. You cannot murder an innocent man." Saul was swayed by Jonathan's argument and said, "All right, I will not kill David." But not long after that, Saul began acting crazy again, hurling spears at David. So David escaped into the night. Saul sent troops to wait outside David's house to attack him. But David's wife, Michal, warned him, "My father's men are waiting to attack you. You must escape while it is dark." Michal helped him climb out a window, and David snuck past the troops. Early the next morning, the troops came to the door to get David. Michal told them, "He's sick in bed." She'd put a statue in their bed and covered its head with goat hair. But this didn't fool the troops. When the troops reported to the king what had happened, he demanded, "Michal, how could you betray me like this and let my enemy escape?" But Michal lied to her father. "David threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." Meanwhile, David was hiding in a cave. Saul's armies searched for David but couldn't find him. Cold, hungry, and afraid, David played his stringed instrument and poured out his heart to God through music called Psalms. He sang, "God, you are my rock and my fortress and the one who rescues me." Others who were running from the king hid with David in the cave. This group of fugitives joined together to fight for Israel, even though King Saul and his armies were searching for them. Twice, David was close enough to kill Saul and take over as king. His ragtag group of followers pleaded with him, "The king is crazy. This is your chance." But David refused and said, "I would never harm the king. He was chosen by God." But soon after that, King Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in battle. When David heard the news, he was filled with sadness, and he wrote a song to honor them at their funeral. Scene 2. David becomes king. Before long, the leaders of Israel asked David to be the new king. God said to David, "I will make you known throughout history. I am giving you this land, and I will protect you from your enemies. From your descendants will be many kings, and a kingdom that never ends." King David did what was good and right for all the people, uniting them to follow God's ways. David deeply loved God, but he wasn't perfect. One afternoon, David looked out from his palace window and noticed a beautiful woman bathing below. He found out that she was the wife of one of his generals. David had her brought to the palace, and then he slept with her. She became pregnant. To hide what he had done, David gave orders to have her husband stranded at the front lines in battle, where he was easily killed. Soon after that, David brought the general's widow to the palace and married her. One of David's closest advisors, Nathan, knew what he had done. Instead of confronting David directly, Nathan told him a story about a rich man who took a poor man's sheep, even though the rich man had plenty of his own. At the end of the story, David reacted in anger. "That rich man must be punished." Nathan told David, "That man is you. You took something that was not yours." David fell on his face in shame. He broke down and cried, "I have done something terrible against God." Nathan comforted him. "God will forgive you and spare your life, but your son's life will not be spared." Soon after that, David's young son became very ill and died. After David grieved for his son, he went to the tabernacle to pray and worship God. David ruled Israel for many years after that and tried to lead the people in following God's ways. Scene 3, Absalom. Later in David's life, one of his sons, named Absalom, became very popular with the people of Israel. Absalom was a very handsome man with long flowing hair. Absalom used his charm and popularity to persuade people to overthrow his father, the king. He sent secret messengers to all of Israel's tribes, stirring up a rebellion. When David found out about the conspiracy against him, he fled from Jerusalem into the wilderness. As David and his small army left the city, he wept in sadness over his son's betrayal. But Absalom and his soldiers chased after David. As Absalom's soldiers got closer, David's army convinced him to step back. David told his men, "I will let you fight for me, but if you find my son Absalom, do not harm him." David's army turned and attacked Absalom's soldiers in a forest, and a huge battle ensued. During the battle, Absalom was riding on a mule and his long hair got tangled in a tree branch. He hung from the tree defenseless as his mule ran off. When David's general Joab found Absalom, he ignored David's instructions, and his men drove their swords into Absalom, killing him. When David heard what happened, he burst into tears. "Absalom, Absalom," David cried, "if only I had died instead of you." Overwhelmed with grief, David returned home to Jerusalem. David went on to rule as king for many more years. He was loved by God and by the people of Israel.